Welcome, dear viewer, to a tale where a man's unexpected path led him to discover the music of true love in the most extraordinary of circumstances. Enjoy watching. John's parents always dreamed that he would become a musician. Everyone in their family were musicians, and it was just assumed that little John would follow the well-trodden path. From an early age, he had no free time. He'd rush from regular school to music school and then to his tutor. If you woke him up in the middle of the night and asked what he hated most in the world, he would instantly say, music. Of course, his mom, dad, and especially grandma didn't know this, otherwise they'd have had a heart attack. But John kept quiet. Until one day, when he was in 8th grade and his shelf was already groaning with awards, a new girl joined their class. Even years later, John remembered how his heart stopped, then started beating again, but in a completely different rhythm. She was beautiful, an angel, and John knew he didn't have a chance of even getting close to her. He was skinny, pale, always carrying some musical instrument. It was a shame, but John wasn't one to give up easily. For a week, he watched the girl, whose name was Angela, before finally working up the courage to approach her. "Hi." She looked at him with huge, surprised eyes. "Hi. Can I walk you home?" The girl laughed, looked him up and down, and replied, "No, if the wind blows you away, I'll have to take the blame, and if we get attacked by bullies, then I'll have to rescue you." The whole class cracked up laughing, and John ran home. His grandma met him there. "What happened? Why aren't you at music school? And what's with that scruffy look?" John hurled his violin across the room onto the couch and yelled, "Because I hate your music school! I hate music and I'm not doing it anymore!" Grandma clutched her heart, and John ran to his room and locked himself in. From that day, something changed in him. He flatly refused to do any more music. Grandma took valerian drops, Mom cried, and Dad remained ominously silent. He understood his son. At his age, he'd gone through similar emotions himself, wishing he could go fishing and drink beer with the guys instead of all this music stuff. Eventually, after Mom and Grandma even took him to a psychologist, John stood his ground on choosing his own path. He joined a sports team, took up swimming, and basically lived the opposite lifestyle. Mom cried again, Grandma took more valerian, and John often came home with a bloody nose. He never went near music again. When it came time to choose where to study, the womenfolk weakly suggested music or arts college. But John said he wanted to join law enforcement. Grandma had to be taken to the ER, now Mom was on the valerian drops. He failed the medical exam, so gritting his teeth, he applied to medical school instead. The women seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. A doctor, how respectable. Until they found out John's chosen specialty. He wanted to be a forensic pathologist working for law enforcement. "How's it going, Stan?" the major who entered the office asked. He was John's close friend, Eaton, as well as his superior. "Why the formalities, Eaton? The dead won't tell anyone you know how to talk normally." Eaton smirked and stared at John. "I still can't get over how you can eat in here." John shrugged. "What's wrong with it? Where am I supposed to eat? Out on the street? Want some tea, by the way?" Eaton swallowed hard and shook his head. "No thanks." John slid some papers across the desk. "Here's your report. You didn't come to visit a friend. You came for these, right?" As Eaton scanned the papers, he finally smiled. "Thanks, John. Just as I expected. No need to rush now. I can actually catch up with my friend. How's it going?" John laughed. "Pretty mercenary of you. I shudder to think how you'd talk to me without this report." They chatted for a while, until John asked if Eaton had patched things up with his wife, Allie. Eaton sighed. "Are you kidding? She took little Johnny and went to stay with her mother. No amount of talking helps. My mother-in-law keeps fanning the flames too, saying I'll get myself shot and Allie will be a single mom." John washed out his mug. "Women are strange. If Allie leaves you and files for divorce, won't she still be a single mom?" Eaton looked pleadingly at his friend. "John, could you please talk to her? She's gone completely off the rails this past week, won't listen to a word I say." John studied his friend closely. "You do look pretty rough. Did something else happen?" Eaton settled into his chair. "Listen, I'm starting to seriously consider quitting this job myself. You know how I was saying we got a new boss? What a tyrant. Has he come to see you yet?" John shook his head. He'd heard they had a new department head, but never met the guy. "I've got a really bad feeling about this, John. He's a slippery character. The whole department is talking about how he parties with the team. It's strange internal affairs hasn't taken an interest. He must have connections greasing the wheels. Hopefully he leaves me alone for now. Lucky you sitting in this basement with no one bothering you. The phone rang in the office they were in. Well, another body's arrived. Gotta go. Eaton said goodbye quickly, mentioning they were going to try talking to Allie again that weekend, and hurried out. John went upstairs. He immediately recognized the uniformed man throwing his weight around as the unpopular new boss everyone had mentioned. He was disheveled, reeking of alcohol, and shouting, "Why do I have to wait? Where have you people been?" John looked at him calmly. "Please don't raise your voice, sir. This isn't the place to be shouting and rushing." The lieutenant colonel glared at him but lowered his tone. "I need you to do the autopsy as quickly as possible. The girl had a heart condition. It was an expected death, so just give me the basic report. The body needs to be released to the family this evening. I'll take care of the arrangements." "Your acquaintances?" John asked. The man hesitated. "More like acquaintances of acquaintances. Just do as I said, understand?" John nodded. "I understand perfectly." The man left, and John pulled back the sheet, stopping short. The deceased often looked peaceful, but there was always the unmistakable stamp of death on their face. Not this time. The young woman looked alive and stunningly beautiful besides. John sighed. The beautiful and young ones leaving, while some fairly unpleasant people somehow stuck around. He gave instructions to prepare for the autopsy. Whenever he picked up the scalpel, the body before him became just a professional point of interest, a kind of quest to find something that put all the pieces in their place. In this case, apparently there was nothing to look for, but John wasn't the kind of person who blindly took others at their word. Not in his line of work. He made a small incision, barely a centimeter, and recoiled from the table. The woman's skin had visibly twitched. John leaned down to her lips. No, there didn't seem to be any breathing, or was there? What nonsense. He grabbed a stethoscope and bent over the body. At first he heard nothing, then moved to her right side and froze. Her heart was beating on the right, an extremely rare condition, but how could she have been brought here alive? And her heartbeat was very faint. John grabbed his phone. He realized something wasn't right here. Otherwise, the lieutenant colonel wouldn't have rushed him like that. "Eaton, I urgently need your help, but nobody can know about it." He quickly explained the situation. Less than 15 minutes later, his friend appeared at the door, a woman with a medical bag following him. "All right, show me." She leaned over the woman. After a few minutes, she opened her bag. "She's been drugged. We need to find the injection site before I can revive her." Eaton and John set to work. They quickly found the mark under her knee, a very discreet location. About 15 minutes later, the woman let out a moan. The doctor looked at them. "What do we do? She needs to go to a hospital, get IVs." "Could it be done at home instead? We're seriously worried about her safety." "I think so. She seems to have a strong constitution, doesn't appear to drink or smoke." Eaton said thoughtfully, "It's bizarre how she could have ended up in that crowd in the first place." John took off his lab coat. "Let's go to my place. My shift ends in half an hour, but my relief always comes early. The main thing is getting her to the car before he shows up." They managed it. John called out to his arriving counterpart that he was running late but would call him. Then they quickly took off. At John's home, once the doctor had the woman on an IV and some color returning to her cheeks, Eaton asked, "What now? You know they'll be looking for her by evening time." "Then you need to talk to Internal Affairs before tonight." Eaton shook his head. "Easier said than done, but I'll try." 2 hours later, the woman came to. She looked around the room in confusion, her gaze finally settling on John in a way that made his heart skip a beat. "Who are you?" "And you?" she answered uncertainly. "I'm Natalie." There was a knock at the door, and John went to answer it. It was Eaton with 2 other men. "You're just in time. The woman's awake," the doctor said quietly. "Just ask what's absolutely crucial. In about 20 minutes, she'll be asleep again." It turned out Natalie had a side job cleaning houses. She'd been hired to clean the mansion where the lieutenant colonel and his cronies were partying. The owner took a liking to the beautiful young woman. When she firmly rejected his advances, he flew into a rage. He knocked her out and injected her with something, saying it would make her more cooperative. But either he miscalculated the dose or she had an unusual reaction. They all thought she was dead when her heart couldn't be detected. None of them drunk enough to realize it was just on the wrong side. The colonel needed a medical report that she died from a heart attack, which is what he'd instructed John to provide. By evening, he planned to have the body released for obfuscation of some kind. Once Natalie had fully recovered that evening, John told her the whole story of how they'd met. Understandably, she was terrified and asked to call her mom. The lieutenant colonel was arrested red-handed when he showed up at the morgue to collect the body later that night. 2 months later, Eaton was head of the department. They'd managed to persuade Allie to come back home in the end. It took some doing, but Natalie's quiet words to her made an impact. "You have no idea. If it wasn't for John and your husband, I wouldn't be here." 3 months after that, the forensic pathologist got married. Yes, he found a woman who didn't care one bit about his profession. In fact, she viewed it with a kind of reverence, saying only a true professional could have saved her life like that. Mom was relieved. "Well, thanks, B. He at least found himself a normal wife, not some lady in pants with a gun strapped on." She didn't know the full story of how they met, and Natalie turned out to be an accomplished violinist. At their wedding, for the first time in many years, John picked up the violin again. Together they played a wistful, romantic melody that had all the guests in tears.